Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Jaya. Jaya Vishnuman Paramahans Pavaraj Gacharya, also the CC AC, Marshal Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Namachar Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Sakaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Sri Radha Krishna, Gopa Gopidas Shama Kunda Radha Kunda, Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Sri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Navadvip Dham Ki Jai, Gang Jamuna Tulasi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Samavetta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Go Premanandi, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutade Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswata Deve Gauravani Prachadane Nirvashesha Shunyavadi Paschatradesha Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 19, verse 22. Asrutya Chadrishigana Vatshaparikshit Samam Madhu Chudguru Chavalikam Abhashate Gnan Abhinandya Yuktan Susrusamanas Charitani Vishnu Asrutya, just after hearing that Rishigana, the sages assembled, Vatsha, speaking, Parikshit, Maharaj Parikshit, Samam, impartial, Madhuchut, sweet to hear, Guru, grave, Cha, also, Avyalikam, perfectly true, Abhashata, said, Enan, all of them, Abhinandya, congratulated, Yuktan, appropriately presented, Susrushamana, being desirous to hear, Charitani, activities of Vishnu, the personality of Godhead. Translation: all that was spoken by the great sages was very sweet to hear, full of meaning, and appropriately presented as perfectly true. So after hearing them, Maharaj Parikshit, desiring to hear of the activities of Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, congratulated the great sages. Text 23, the king said, O great sages, you have all very kindly assembled here, having come from all parts of the universe. You are all as good as supreme knowledge personified, who resides in the planet above the three worlds, Satyaloka. Consequently, you are naturally inclined to do good to others, but for this you have no interest either in this life or in the next. Purport: 6 kinds of opulences, namely wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation, are all originally the different attributes pertaining to the absolute personality of Godhead. The living beings, who are part and parcel entities of the Supreme Being, have all these attributes partially up to the full strength of 78%. In the material world, these attributes, up to the 78% of the Lord's attributes, are covered by the material energy, as the sun is covered by a cloud. The covered strength of the sun is very dim compared to the original glare, and similarly the original color of the living beings with such attributes becomes almost extinct. There are 3 planetary systems, namely the lower worlds, the intermediate worlds, and the upper worlds. The human beings on earth are situated at the beginning of the intermediate worlds, but living beings like Brahma and his contemporaries live in the upper worlds, of which the topmost is Satyaloka. In Satyaloka, the inhabitants are fully cognizant of Vedic wisdom, and thus the mystic cloud of material energy is cleared. Therefore, they are known as the Vedas personified. Such persons, being fully aware of knowledge both mundane and transcendental, have no interest in either the mundane or transcendental worlds. They are practically desireless devotees. In the mundane world, they have nothing to achieve, and in the transcendental world, they are full in themselves. And then, why do they come to the mundane world? They descend on different planets as messiahs by the order of the Lord to deliver the fallen souls. On the earth, they come down and do good to the people of the world in different circumstances, under different climatic influences. They have nothing to do in this world save and except reclaim the fallen souls rotting in material existence, deluded by material energy. Translation: all that was spoken by the great sages was very sweet to hear, full of meaning, and appropriately presented as perfectly true. So after hearing them, Maharaj Parikshit desired to hear of the activities of Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of God, had congratulated the great sages. The king said, O great sages, you have all very kindly assembled here, having come from all parts of the universe. You are all as good as supreme knowledge personified, who resides in the planet above the 3 worlds, Satyaloka. Consequently, you are naturally inclined to do good to others, but for this you have no interest either in this life or in the next. In the previous verses, all the great sages and devatas praised Parikshit Maharaj for his decision to fast until death and to give up the material world and of course attain the Lord. So in response, Parikshit Maharaj begins to praise the assembled sages. So this is the appropriate etiquette. You get praised and then you praise the other persons. from the etiquette point of view. But of course, in this case, both types of praise were actually true. Parikshit was a great devotee of the Lord, and he was perfect in his actions, and therefore that was praiseworthy. And the great sages also were very elevated, and thus whatever they said was remarkable and true, so they should be praised for their true statements. So in that second verse here, the Parikshit Maharaj, he talks about how they come from, they've gathered together from all over the universe, and they have all sorts of knowledge, perfect knowledge, from the topmost planet, and because of that, whatever they say is absolutely true. Moreover, they have no interest except to spread mercy everywhere, and that is to do good for others. That's their very nature. So this is obviously a great praise of devotees of the Lord who have no interest except to praise and serve the Lord in all ways. So a very nice statement by Parikshit Maharaj. As Prabhupada mentions in the purport, we have the three levels within the material world: the lower area, the middle area, and the upper area. And there's different living entities living in all these areas. And there's, in these areas, of course, there are also intelligent beings in all levels. So in the lower planetary systems, we have very intelligent beings who are like human beings, but they live in the lower planets. And then in the middle area, which is our area, we have the human beings and other beings in this area who have intelligence. And then we have the upper beings, the devatas, the sages, all the way up to Brahmaloka, who also have, say, similar types of bodies, but much more refined intelligence than us. So they're all, say, human-like, intelligent beings, but according to the gunas, their type of knowledge is different. So in the lower planetary systems, they have a prominence of tamas, or ignorance, in spite of the fact that they may be very intelligent. So it's not they're ignorant and they're just dull-headed. They may be very intelligent, but it's very tamasic intelligence, very intelligence guided by darkness and laziness and a sense of immediate enjoyment. And in the middle area, that's the Earth planet, we're a mixture. And then in upper planets, it's very sattvic. And because of the favorability of sattva gun, the persons in the upper planetary systems have a capacity for scriptural knowledge and scriptural understanding. And therefore they are, we say, superior to the other beings. And of course, due to the law of karma, everybody gets their enjoyment, but they get it in different ways. So the life on the upper planets is considered to be superior in all ways. Of course, it's sattvic, but then they have longer lifespans, more types of enjoyment, very subtle types of enjoyment, etc. So sometimes the persons in the lower planets, they want to get that type of enjoyment. Human beings can get that by doing sacrifices, etc., and then they can elevate themselves in their next lifetime. Demons get envious and they try to get it by force. So they invade the upper planets, have big wars or whatever, battles, and they defeat the devatas and they grab the Svargaloka for some time. Or we see Ravana trying to build a staircase up to there so that everybody from the earth can get upwards to Svargaloka. So they try by very foolish means to get that type of enjoyment also, but they're not really qualified for it. So there's different types of enjoyment in the material world as well. But more important than that is the knowledge aspect. And that is the best knowledge is in the upper planets. So therefore this verse talks about the persons on the upper planets. These sages have supreme knowledge, and they are knowledge personified because of their situation. They're where they live, and due to their activities they've attained this position. So therefore the persons on upper planets, they can speak very nicely and educate everybody in the universe. But of course this knowledge also is of various sorts again, because the people on Svargaloka go there by sacrifices for enjoyment. So it's not necessarily knowledge of liberation or knowledge of bhakti. There's a little bhakti there, but it's maybe prominently that other type of knowledge. So we have karma kanda knowledge, we got jnana kanda knowledge, and then we get bhakti knowledge. So there's all that mixture of knowledge there, but it's all scriptural, so at least it's sattvic in categorization there in upper planets. So we'll get some sages who are interested in the karma yoga aspect, and some in the liberation aspect of jnana yoga, and some who are great devotees of the Lord. So all these types of sages had gathered for ultimately hearing the Bhagavatam. So to talk about knowledge, of course here it refers to the Vedic knowledge, which is considered to be perfect and supreme. But it is not this book knowledge. It means that you have to, of course we see that the Vedas, it cannot be book knowledge because it is passed on by a certain method which does not allow everybody to get it. So you can't just grab the Vedas and start reciting it and memorizing it. The Vedas have a tradition of being passed on from one teacher to another person. And so it's an oral transmission. So it's at the decision of the guru that he gives to the disciple that knowledge. So one is the knowledge of the syllables and the words, and then the disciple will have to memorize everything inside out. 1 Veda, 2 Vedas, 3 Vedas, 4 Vedas, etc. And then he has to learn what it means. And then he has to learn how to apply it. Then he has to realize it. So these are the different aspects of knowledge, and one is not complete unless one gets it all. And the guru has the right to either give the knowledge or not give the knowledge, depending on the person. If he doesn't think it's qualified, he won't give it to him. So knowledge is such that, as is said by what Alexander Pope was, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Drink not, or drink deep from the spring of knowledge, or something like that, he says. So that applies here. We find the demons get a little knowledge and they build a huge machine to destroy everybody in the world. The same knowledge can be used in another way to benefit everybody in the world. So depending on how you use the knowledge, you can destroy the world or you can help the world. So that was why the knowledge of the Vedas was kept very secret and only given to certain people, because they knew that if the wrong people get it, they'll misuse it. If the good people take it, then they'll use it for the benefit, which is the ultimate goal of the Vedas itself, not to destroy anybody, but to give benefit. But they understood if it's used in the wrong way, it's also very dangerous. So therefore, the guru decided who would get the knowledge, and there was no written books, so that is necessarily up to the guru. He had all the knowledge, he had to give it to somebody else. So that was the original intent of the parampara system, to pass on knowledge in that way, which is very secret, in one sense secret, but available to the qualified disciple. So it involved let's say the material part of it, of just getting the words and understanding the concepts, and then the other aspect is the realization of it, so that you could apply the knowledge properly. So that's the important part of it. So within bhakti we say that, for instance, in Nectar Devotion, in the first part, after discussing the basic principles of bhakti and pure bhakti, etc. Then Rupa Goswami says the approach, or the person who approaches this work with logic will not understand it, and he'll reject it. The person with taste, he can approach it, he can understand it, and he can absorb it and realize it. But if we just go with an intellectual mind and think we can analyze everything by our intelligence, it won't work, and we won't get the real product of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So that applies to all of bhakti. It's not a scholastic process or an intellectual process of logic. It does involve logic in order to present things reasonably to us, and it gives us a reasonable path for developing our bhakti. So in that sense, there is some logic involved there. But ultimately, logic is limited to the material world. That's at least our logic. Of course, we have spiritual logic, which is maybe irrational to us, but we have the material logic, and it's limited to this world. It's based on how we perceive this world and cause and effect of this world, etc. So it has its limitations as far as interpreting scriptures is concerned. So though we can analyze scriptures logically, and that's what the acharyas do, there is a certain limitation there, a limit where we can go with that logic. And there's certain aspects which are beyond logic completely, and you can't apply the logic at all there. So that's what we call the inconceivable, the achintya aspect of things. And ultimately all spiritual life, the spiritual world, the spiritual rasas, the spiritual forms are all achintya. They are inconceivable, and we cannot analyze them with our material intelligence. So we can to some degree do that, but at the same time it's a limited type of understanding. We can't think that we've understood everything simply by analyzing it intellectually and then coming to some conclusion. Then we say, that's it. No. So it requires that higher realization. So we sometimes talk about knowledge and then realize knowledge, or the vijnana. So that is very, very necessary in order to really understand the scripture. So that's why we do have the concept of a guru, even within, we're not following Vedas, but within the devotional line of Lord Chaitanya and ISKCON, we have the idea of guru because they have a more mature understanding of the scriptures as it applies to us. So therefore, they should be the ones that teach the others. So therefore the simple logical process is not complete. It is definitely helpful, but it is not complete in regards to devotional service. So therefore we do need that other aspect of realization. And if that's absent, then we have the danger of coming to a lot of wrong conclusions. So therefore we have to be very, very careful in that regard. And that is why we depend upon the acharyas and the guru, higher authorities, when it comes to some particular problems. So therefore we have some hierarchy of how we get our knowledge and how we understand the knowledge. It involves the scripture, but then it also involves the acharyas and the guru, so that we get the proper understanding of those words in the scripture. So the persons on the upper planets have a higher understanding because they are devoid of the lower gunas, and so that in itself is favorable for Atmagyan, or understanding we're not the body, because sattva is favorable to understanding you're the soul, not the body. And that'll lead to jnana, so that part is there. But we also know that in the upper planets, those devatas are devotees of the Lord, and Brahma is head of our sampradaya. So we have a devotional line there as well, so it's not just sattvic. There's devotion there also. And also the Supreme Lord himself resides there in different forms. He resides in Brahmaloka as the Mahapurusha. He resides Indraloka as Vamanadev, because he came up there as the younger brother of Indra. Therefore, in the upper planets, the Lord is quite pervasive, even by his personal presence. And devotees are also there. So the devotional aspect is there, and therefore we'll expect these persons also to have great knowledge of bhakti, as well as jnana. Not just knowledge, but they'll also have realization. So sometimes we criticize the devatas as being devotees, but mixed with karma and whatever like that. Then we may give the example of Brahma, because he tried to fool Krishna, or Indra, who sent storms and clouds to destroy Vrindavan, etc. So, they're not real devotees, or at best mixed devotees. But on the other hand, we do also have the other side of the devatas, in which they're considered actually devotees. And in the Nectar Devotion there, when it talks about rasas, then they're considered in dasya rasa. So they're actually got prema. So they're not just ordinary, kind of mixed devotees like material world devotees here in our world. they got some higher type of, rasa as well. And of course, obviously, Brahma has a relationship with the Lord, and he's head of our sampradaya. So they're not normal devotees. So as well as the knowledge aspect, they do have the realization. At the same time, we cannot divorce the two things. You cannot have that realization without the preliminary knowledge, that is, basis on the scripture. We cannot say, I'll just get realization, don't care about the scripture, I'll just get my realization. That's not going to work. So that's why we do emphasize, you have to follow the scripture, and we'll quote some scripture, or the Vedas, or whatever. And we also quote the parampara. You have to come in some sort of sampradaya. So the sampradaya is there because it is all coming back to the scripture. It is getting the knowledge of the scripture through a certain line of teachers. So the realization is also not independent of the scripture. But again, as I said, the scripture itself is not independent of realization. It also needs the realization. The two things have to go together. Then we get proper combination for application of the scripture also. So we will often get problems or controversies. And one of the reasons may be because we're relying on our intellect to interpret scriptures. And as much as we do that, and it's good if we go to scripture rather than to concoct things on our own, still there's limitations. So therefore we got ways in which we can interpret scripture also. So then there's a whole system of how we filter that knowledge, or how we judge which is the conclusion of scripture, where we quote from, because you can quote anything, So we can quote Prabhupada letters and get one conclusion. We can quote Prabhupada's conversations, maybe we're going to get a different conclusion. We can quote Prabhupada's books and get another conclusion. So how do we correlate the three things together? We see contradictory statements there. If everything agrees, fine. But the problem is it doesn't agree sometimes. Then we get problems. And then we get arguments. So then we have to have a system of, filtering through all of this. So that's what we call the hermeneutics, which we're also discussing in the GBC now to some degree, because it's a little confusion, to come to a conclusion unless we have the proper outlook on what we accept as authority, and which is a stronger authority, and how we come to a conclusion. So that's, of course, again, the logical process. But then the other part is the realization aspect. We have to balance that out. So when we had Srila Prabhupada here, there was no problem, because he had the realization, so he would say something, we just follow it. So it was scriptural and realization went together very nicely. But when Prabhupada's not with us, and we can't ask him, should I do this or that, then we don't know. So that realization aspect's absence, and we can struggle with the process of knowledge through the different scriptures and Prabhupada statements and hermeneutics, etc. But still, if we don't have that higher realization, we may also go off also. So it's a difficult process sometimes to come to proper conclusions on some issues like that. So that's what we're dealing with in our quest for knowledge. Knowledge is there, but as I said, sometimes it's not so clear. where is this? It could be this or that or whatever like that. So we have systems, and then we also have realization like that. In this case, it's very good because we had all qualified people here. We had Parikshit, a great king, and a devotee. Then we had all the people of the universe who were also very knowledgeable. So there's not going to be much of a divisive attitude here because they all have very high realization, and the understanding of Scripture is very wonderful. So therefore, they're all going to have an agreement, a very harmonious agreement. Yeah. Okay, any question there?
How do we, like, if we want to make a statement based on Vedic scripture, Vedic injunction, what takes precedence, like, between Shruti and Smriti?
Okay, yeah. Oh, well, traditionally, even in, I think it is in Tattva-sandarbha in one place, and Jiva Goswami says the Shruti, which is the Vedas, 4 Vedas, and the Upanishads, and the Karma Kanda, and the Gyan Kanda, and Upasana Kanda, and the Angas, that has more strength than the Smritis, which is Puranas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Manu Smriti, etc. If there's a contradiction, it would be more powerful. That's what the traditional view. The Gaudiya view is that, and Jiva Goswami's view is that the Puranas and Mahabharata are considered to be the 5th Veda, which means that they're equal. So therefore, we don't put the Puranas and other Smritis in a lesser position than the Shruti, the Vedas. Now, Shankaracharya puts the Shruti in a higher position for his argumentation. So that means Upanishads are Shruti, then he chooses the major Upanishads, and then he comes to an impersonal conclusion that everything is Maya except Brahman, and impersonal Brahman, and then everything that Puranas say in Bhagavatam says about Krishna being a beautiful form, and he's got playing a flute, that's all secondary. So the primary is the no form, no qualities of the Shruti. So they put that's one of his arguments he uses. So we say no, we give equal importance. But then as Gaudiyas, that we even have a further elaboration. Not only are they equal, but that Srimad Bhagavatam is the final conclusion of Veda Vyas after he wrote all the other Puranas. So he's an incarnation of the Lord, plus he wrote the Puranas, which are equal to the Vedas, and then he wrote Srimad Bhagavatam as a conclusion after Vyasadeva. He was very, very frustrated, so Narada, when he says, then you have to write Bhagavatam to show that Krishna is the Supreme. So then we take, this is the final and the strongest authority of all. At the same time, we do not, we say this does not contradict the Vedas or the Upanishads. Because if it did, then it would be strange, how can it be scriptural at all? So no, the one confirms the other. So the meaning in the Bhagavatam is the same as the meaning in the Vedas. But it's a little bit hidden in the Vedas, but it's there nevertheless. So therefore the Shruti is, and the Smriti say the same things. The Bhagavatam is the same thing as the other Puranas, and ultimately the same thing as the Upanishads and the Vedas. But it's more clear, and we can say, give us a final conclusion. So therefore we take the Bhagavatam as the ultimate conclusion of all the Vedic literature, as the strongest. Yeah, and of course in the Bhagavatam, what is the unique statement? The unique statement there is, Krishnastu Bhagavan Svayam. Krishna is the ultimate form of the Lord. Everyone should worship him because you'll get the most bliss from that. So that's the final conclusion of all the Vedic literature, and then we can trace that back. If you go through, you can ultimately trace it to the Vedas ultimately and get the same statement there.
Could you give a very brief summary of hermeneutics?
So this is, I guess you could call it like epistemology in one sense, which is also your source of knowledge, but it's a little more detailed. So we all need a system of knowledge. So then basically we have sense perception, logical process using the mind based upon sense perception, which is the normal things in the Western world. And then we have scripture, which is the unique feature of, say, the Vedas. So, and of the three, the Vedas considered to be the strongest. And the sense perception and logic are secondary to that and have to agree with it to some degree. We have to correlate the three things together, but we take the authority of Scripture. And then, of course, what's Scripture, and then which is the highest Scripture? According to Jiva Goswami, who we get, ultimately Bhagavatam is the final authority for us. So within this we have a whole, a system of coming out with the truth, because within Scripture itself, then we'll find contrary statements. So Karmakanda says one thing, Shiva Purana says Shiva's Bhagavan, and then Bhagavatam says Krishna's Bhagavan. So we get contrary statements. So how do we say can they all be correct? Or is one correct and one is wrong? Or how do we correlate all of this? So we have a system of filtering and seeing which is a stronger statement out of that. So this is, of course, what Jiva Goswami says, and then he says Bhagavatam is the authority, and therefore everything should agree with that. Then he gives his logic for that system. So traditionally, the hermeneutics is not too controversial, except in the details. So all Vaishnavas and even Shankaracharya will get Scripture as supreme over sense perception and logic. So everyone who agrees with that, and then we accept the Vedas over other scriptures of the world. So that puts us in the Vedic line. Everybody agrees with that. But then we get all sorts of different philosophies like Sankhya, Nyaya, Karma, Mimamsa, which are atheistic. A lot of them are atheistic. They don't believe in God, coming out of the Vedas. So even if you accept the Vedas as your authority, it doesn't mean you get the right conclusion. So you have to come to the right conclusion. So therefore you have to interpret or get the proper meaning out of the Vedas. So that's where we could say the hermeneutics comes into play. So there are traditional ways, and as for ISKCON devotees, it's not a really problem as far as Scripture is concerned. We just go back to the Acharyas and see what they say, and then we take their version. So we read the commentaries of our Acharyas to get the meaning of Bhagavatam. But then we have this other problem within ISKCON also, because we don't only have scriptures, we have the translation of the scripture, and then we get conversations and letters, etc. And then we get contrary things there. Even within the scripture we say different, sometimes there's a thing like, that's a big problem, like we saw with the Chapala Gopal there. Well, this is not what it says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. There's two gentlemen called Chapala and Gopal. So there's a contradiction. So what do we do with it? So we've got to resolve it somehow or other, or leave it there, one of them, so we have to do something about it. So we find scripture, parts of the scripture may be contrary, that's one thing. Then we'll find the letters may be contrary to the books or something, or the conversations will be contrary to the books, or the books may be contrary to other, the conversations contrary to another conversation. So how do we deal with that and make it harmonious? How do we come to a conclusion on that? So that's where the hermeneutics comes into play, that we have to figure out a system for seeing how to come to a conclusion by categorizing the different types of statements as stronger or weaker according to different conditions.
And that's what the judicial
Well, the Sastric Advisory Council, they've written a paper, which is just coming out. It came out last year, but they're making a course on that, which they're presenting, I think, starting in December or something, is it? Was it something like that? A 4-week course, four sessions or something, 3 hours, to just introduce that material and get the people to use that to conclude different things about Scripture that are difficult to conclude on our own. So they've come up with that paper.
A lot of persons sing songs of glorification of the demigods, and for them to get benefit, do they have to know that the demigods have prema, or are they just glorifying them for their...
This is devotees?
Well, they're like yogis,
Oh, other people.
Yeah, like they glorify Ganesh, they glorify...
Well, many people are doing this. Sometimes let's say there's different devotees of different Devatas, like particularly Shiva and Durga and Kali, etc. And they got their poets and the people are writing things and people are singing things like that. So basically, they are Devata worshippers, and they don't have the same idea that we think Devatas are material, and then above the Devatas there's Vishnu and Krishna who are beyond the material world. So they don't have that real conception that everybody's equal. So we take that as a wrong understanding. But of course, on a lower level, we can say it's acceptable because we have the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas, and people are encouraged, if they can't accept the Supreme Lord, at least worship the Devatas and follow some vratas and regulations and understand as a higher authority, etc. So in that sense, and they're bona fide in one sense because they're not concocted images. So it's a lesser process. So it's not condemned, but at the same time, we don't take it as the proper way of doing this from our point of view.
There is some benefit.
Yeah. Just like Krishna in Bhagavad Gita chapter 3 is glorifying karma yoga, but then he says in chapter 9 they're all foolish. They have to get temporary goals from it, so it's not really intelligent to do so, but he recommends it in chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita. Yeah.
I have another question, if you don't mind. You may, please take this a humble question, but you were talking about the qualification of the personalities the sages were talking about, and they're very qualified to discuss this. So you also talk about our GBC and that it is, looking into the scriptures, because we do sometimes get sides within ISKCON. So my question is, maybe you could explain, but I'll just come out front and say, is the GBC qualified? Or how do they become qualified to be the GBC? Maybe you could explain a little bit about that.
Well, Prabhupada set up a system. He appointed GBCs originally, and then he said the GBCs for life, like that. So that's how it came into being. We can also, of course, we can say, well, this person wasn't really qualified and they left or whatever like that, so that's there. But Prabhupada took the outstanding devotees, many of the outstanding devotees, and made them GBCs, and then he said, okay, you manage the society. So that's how it started. And then after that, then the system evolved. At one point, of course, Prabhupada also said we should have elections, but then he didn't do that later on. So then the GBC basically started appointing members. That's the system they did. So they take recognized devotees or devotees who had experience in managing and whatever. So that's how it came out.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah.
You were talking about Gyan Vigyan, to understand the spiritual topics, it needs more than just logically analyzing the Vedas for the Vigyan. So one could say, well, how do we then face the logicians like Prabhupada and the whole Parampara did to take it to the next level, because they don't really surrender. They want to just squeeze out some logic out of the Vedic scriptures. So how did Prabhupada really do it to take these people to the Vigyan level?
Which people?
Like the logicians, like they just try to squeeze out some meaning out of the Vedic scriptures. They did, like when you preach sometimes to Indians, you feel like, why am I wasting my time?
Hopeless.
Yeah, it's hopeless. But what is it then really that takes these people to the next level? Is it?
Yeah.
How did Prabhupada and the Parampara convince these people with logic?
Well, of course, one thing we say is don't preach to the faithless. So you can't convince somebody who doesn't want to be convinced, in other words. So if they may accept the Vedas, but they don't accept a personal conclusion to the Vedas, which is probably they're impersonalists or Devata worshippers, strong Devata worshippers, either of those two things, and they're convinced of that, and they don't listen to you, then we don't preach to them really. We just give them prasadam. In other words, it's very difficult to change their mind immediately. Maybe by prolonged association, yes, they can gradually, their hearts can melt like that. So as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, preaching to those people who have no faith is you just let them hear kirtan and things like that, indirect preaching, but not direct preaching. So that's what, yesterday I said we have the more indirect outreach type preaching or whatever like that for people. So that's for them, where we just let them hear. We don't preach directly and tell them, give up all your sinful habits and just worship Krishna. It's not going to work. So all you can do is this other engagement type of thing for those people. Once they get faith and they get conviction that yes, Krishna is Supreme Lord, I'll worship Him only, then you can start preaching to them. But before that, it's kind of a waste of time. And Krishna says, even in Bhagavad Gita, don't give this knowledge to the envious people. Give it to the faithful people. Okay. Hare Krishna.